I developed a mantra on Caddyshack, which was, it's not my money. If the whole thing blew away, well, it's not my fault.
It was kamikaze filmmaking at its best.
National Lampoon alumni Harold Ramis and Doug Kenney had just scored a big hit with Animal House. For their next project, they teamed up with Brian Doyle-Murray to pen another tale of the slobs versus the snobs, this time set at a country club. When the cast and crew assembled on a Florida golf course called Rolling Hills in September of 1979, things got out of hand quickly.
50% actors, 50% crew, and then some people we didn't know who the hell they were.
But most people were so loaded they don't remember.
This is me in the shot, 1979. This is the call sheet for shooting that day, and 7:45 a.m., which was great because I was still up.
If I remembered anything about the late 70s, I could probably tell you, but it's gone.
It was very difficult for me to watch Caddyshack for a long time without being heavily sedated.
People had so much fun on that movie, and it kind of spoiled me because I thought, oh boy, if this is what filmmaking is like, this is great. It's like having a party every day with all these great, talented people and someone else paying for it.
But studio head Mike Medavoy didn't quite see it that way.
We got a call from Mike Medavoy, who was concerned that there was too much drugs on the set.
Caddyshack was like a daycare center with no babysitters.
But out of the chaos emerged some of the most memorable moments in film comedy.
Oh, this is the worst looking hat I ever saw. Well, you buy a hat like this, I'll bet you get a free bowl of soup, huh?
When Animal House was released in 1978, no one expected it to be such a huge hit on a budget of only $3 million. It did over $140 million at the box office. The guys who made it were now red hot in Hollywood, and the pressure was on.
It raised expectations that everything we did would be as successful as Animal House, and that's dangerous.
With the success of Animal House, Harold Ramis and Doug Kenney formed a production company to develop and pitch new movie projects.
I wanted to direct the next thing that I wrote, and I pitched a couple of movies to John Peters and Orion that they didn't like. One was a very dark social comedy about the American Nazi Party marching in Skokie, Illinois. And the other was a revisionist Marxist Western.
I went, nah, I don't think that's a good idea.
And I said, thank you very much, and that was the end of that meeting.
Around that same time, Doug Kenney and Brian Doyle-Murray had been kicking around an idea for a movie set at a country club.
Brian had been a caddy at a couple of golf courses in the Chicago suburbs. I think it was Indian Hill and Winnetka, and they'd played golf all their teen years.
Harold and Brian Doyle-Murray had met at Chicago's famed Second City. After leaving Second City, Brian and Harold had gone on to work for the National Lampoon Radio Hour, where they met Doug Kenney.
Doug had been the assistant tennis pro and worked in the pro shop at a club.
He had been the kid who was of the working class, and yet he had to be with the kids of social standing. And there was a lot of leftover anger yet to be expressed about that.
If everyone else was wearing jeans and T-shirts, he'd be in a tuxedo. If everyone else was formally dressed, he'd be the guy in the ripped jeans and the T-shirt.
Harvard-educated Doug Kenney was one of the founders of National Lampoon, which in the 1970s had revolutionized American comedy, with writers like Michael O'Donoghue and P.J. O'Rourke, and performers like John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, and Harold Ramis.
He'd been one of the three guys who took the Harvard Lampoon and went national with it, and he made a lot of money really quick.
After being turned down on the Nazi idea, Ramis and Doug went back to Orion with the country club idea.
Harold's agents called me a few days later, and they had a new idea that they wanted to pitch. So, pitch Caddyshack. And I said, that sounds great.
And to serve as executive producer, he brought in John Peters.
I didn't even like golf, but I liked blowing up the golf course.
They had a small, nondescript office. It wasn't glamorous. It was the three of them hammering it out on yellow legal pads.
There was a lot of smoke in the writer's room.
We used kind of the same approach that we'd used on Animal House. Doug and I and Brian would sit down and kind of recall everything we could about our own experience of country clubs, everything we'd ever heard about country clubs, everything that they represented in American life, everything about golf.
The original story had much more to do with the caddies. As the story began coming together, one caddy stood out. He was based on Brian Doyle-Murray's older brother, Ed.
My brother, Ed. He won the caddy scholarship in real life.
In fact, the whole Murray family had a hand in the story.
The lumberyard references in the opening scene. My dad was vice president of J.J. Barney Lumber Company. And with that meant to me was we got 3 yardsticks that were real good for spanking.
We wanted a big Irish Catholic family to open the film because that was the Murray brothers' story. There were 6 Murray brothers and 3 sisters.
9 kids, 2 parents, and 2 bathrooms. Mornings were not quiet.
I had a big family, 9 kids, and that was sort of a show every night, you know. There was, you know, a lot of competition, line acts. It was like old vaudeville. Everybody had their own shtick.
Bill really was a groundskeeper.
Bill was literally selling hot dogs on the 9th hole.
I was a caddy. I was a greenskeeper. I had a hot dog stand on a golf course.
Many of the scenes that went into the script were based on things that happened in real life.
I think I'd only completed 2 rounds of golf my whole life. And in one of them was on a 9-hole public golf course, and I actually struck a person with a golf ball on the next fairway. We use that in the movie, in fact. Ted Knight gets hit in the crotch with a golf ball, and that's what I did that day with this other guy.
The pool scene, it happened. Somebody left. It wasn't a Baby Ruth in the pool.
And the pool emptied really quickly.
After compiling all their notes, they began to assemble the first draft of a script.
Eventually, you make enough notes and threads start to emerge. Doug had kind of clarified the movie. He called it a Bildungsroman, which is a great word from freshman English. It means a coming-of-age story.
But the Bildungsroman they finally emerged with was way too long for a movie script.
The script originally was 250 pages, and we had to get the script down to 115 pages.
I remember vividly because I had to Xerox it.
Mark Canton was brought in by John Peters to help wrestle it down to size. Once the script was down to a more reasonable length, it was submitted to the studio.
You know, like every script, there's always lots of versions of it. And even then, I think we all thought we had a really funny movie.
That didn't mean the studio was prepared to make it, though.
Golf? Golf is boring. How can you make a movie about golf? Is boring. Golf is boring. I heard golf is boring 1,000,000 times. So what's you know? So that was the whole thing was, you know, an obstacle.
People get nervous. It wasn't a sequel. It was untested.
Not only that, Ramis and Kenney were insisting on directing and producing the film themselves.
The film technically had a first-time director and a first-time producer. And in Hollywood lore, that's kind of a recipe for problems.
But the studio was eager to reach the huge youth market the 2 National Lampoon alum had tapped into with Animal House. So they went ahead with the project, but not without hedging their bet.
I will tell you something that Harold Ramis doesn't know. The executive producer turned to me and said, make a list of the top 10 directors that can take this film over so that we can make a snap decision if I need to replace him.
Producer Doug Kenney and director Harold Ramis turned their attention to casting. They were given one directive by the studio: no star, no movie.
Because we were not a very small budget, we needed a star.
Fortunately, Harold and Doug had just the star in mind: Doug's friend, Chevy Chase. Saturday Night Live had made Chevy a big TV star, and he'd just scored a huge hit at the box office with Goldie Hawn in Foul Play.
So Chevy came on board, and that was it. Then when we were rolling.
Once word got out that casting had begun, there was no shortage of people who wanted to audition.
Everybody wanted to be in this movie because Animal House had been such a huge hit.
At the top of the casting to-do list was the part of Danny Noonan, who, in the original script, was in almost every scene. Their first choice was Mickey Rourke.
I just brought in anybody that I thought looked kind of young Irish Catholic, everyman kind of kid.
He was not the Mickey Rourke we know today. He was starting out and a really good actor. We wondered if he could be broadly funny, because there's something about playing comedy that doesn't always work for real method actors.
Orion suggested someone who had just starred in a movie for them, a young actor named Michael O'Keefe.
He'd already been in The Great Santini with Robert Duvall, and he was wonderful in the movie.
If you can hold half of the screen opposite Robert Duvall, then you're doing a really good job for a young guy. So I knew that he had the charisma and the power to be the central character in this film.
They decided to offer O'Keefe the part.
I was thrilled because I knew who Doug was from National Lampoon magazine. I was a big fan of that since high school.
Cindy Morgan was a disc jockey in Chicago before moving to Hollywood to pursue acting. When she came in to read for the part of Lacey Underall, everyone was impressed.
I just remember Cindy coming in and being very good and very beautiful.
I do remember she looked pretty good.
I was kind of like, damn, who's that? You know, that's Cindy Morgan. Whoa.
I saw Lacey as a woman who enjoyed life and enjoyed sex and kind of enjoyed having fun with people a little bit. And a woman knows how to make a man sweat. You just look him in the eye. When I read with Doug Kenney and I saw the sweat trickling down the side of his face, I knew I had the job.
TV actor Ted Knight was eager for a lead role in a film, and the part of Judge Smales was perfect for him.
His timing was impeccable. He really got the movie and got the character.
Rodney Dangerfield was someone that we always loved and would see on the Johnny Carson show. He had never been in a movie.
With Rodney, it was a total crapshoot. I don't think, anyone knew what they were going to get.
The tale of his audition is something of legend.
It was a different time. It was a different period in the culture of America.
Came onto the lot in a big black limousine in a black trench coat.
He was wearing remember those leisure suits, those Miami polyester leisure suits.
And he came into my office and he sat down, undid his tie, undid his pants.
And then he goes like this, "Let's eat."
And that's how I met Rodney Dangerfield. That was his action and his first trip to Hollywood.
We were thinking it was Don Rickles for a long time. But at that time, Rodney Dangerfield was on an amazing run of successful Tonight Show appearances with Johnny Carson. Everything he did just killed. Audience was hysterical. Carson would fall out of his chair laughing.
Yeah, last week I told my doctor I want a vasectomy. He said, with a face like mine, I don't need one.
And Doug looked at me and said, I think Rodney's the guy.
I tell you, I know I'm ugly. Well, while the guy was mugging me, he took off his mask and made me wear it.
The last main character to come on board was Carl, the assistant greenskeeper.
I'd met Bill when he was a teenager. He was selling hot chestnuts on a street corner across the street from Second City in front of a supermarket. And funny. No, there could not have been a funnier hot chestnut salesman in the world.
By the time Caddyshack came around, Bill Murray's career had progressed considerably. He was a cast regular and fan favorite on SNL and had recently starred in Meatballs. His appearance in Caddyshack was supposed to be only a cameo.
Bill Murray came on last, and people didn't know that if he was going to be able to be in the film at all. He was added at the very last second, put into the very last script.
Because of his busy schedule, though, Bill could only be on set for 6 days, which, at the time of casting, seemed fine.
There were no scripted lines for Carl, the assistant greenskeeper, but we recruited Bill, and we had him for 6 days.
With Murray on board, they finally had all the main characters in place, but they had no idea at the time that those casting choices would throw the original plot of the movie, and eventually the entire production, into turmoil.
Orion prided itself on being hands-off. We will let the filmmaker make their own movie.
Caddyshack would eventually test their resolve, as the shoot began to spin more and more out of control. The first hint of trouble to come came during location scouting.
We wanted an old, rich country club.
The script was based on the Murray brothers' experience caddying at an Illinois country club. Shooting in L.A. definitely wouldn't work. But palm trees weren't the only reason the filmmakers didn't want to be on the West Coast.
We wanted to be as far away from Hollywood as we could be for our own self-protective purposes.
The guys intuitively knew that the further they got away from Los Angeles, the more they could make the film they wanted to make.
But the timing was wrong for a Midwest shoot.
It was shot in the fall and winter. It would be snowing in Chicago. We just couldn't do it.
So they decided to look in Florida.
We wanted to shoot in Florida, but we couldn't find any place because we had to blow some of the golf course up.
Yeah, that was the problem.
It was very hard to find the right place.
Because most people didn't want to do it.
It started to feel like a bad Florida land deal.
Shooting had to start no later than August in order to make the next summer release date.
It's like when you buy a house, the realtor shows you the one they think you're going to like best last. So finally we come to...
Rolling Hills Country Club. It couldn't have been more posh and fabulous.
It was the only one that didn't have palm trees. And so it looked like Chicago.
It just seemed perfect in every way. They were happy to have us. They were going to close down the course as we needed it.
There was, however, one drawback.
We found out we were on the final approach to Fort Lauderdale Airport. There were 75 airplanes a day. And there was condo construction on two sides of the golf course, full-time bulldozers, earth movers, hammering, saws, everything.
The constant roar of planes overhead would plague the shoot from start to finish. But the location did have one thing going for it.
There was a motel right on the golf course where all the actors were staying.
Having all those actors living in the hotel and a lot of the crew living right on the course meant you could roll out of bed 5 minutes before you had to be to work.
Living all together in the hotel had another advantage.
The after hours were as important as creating a community of crew and actors as anything.
In late summer 1979, the Caddyshack cast and crew was supposed to be making final preparations to start shooting, but instead, they were making hurricane preparations.
We taped up our windows, bought water, batteries, that whole thing.
But this was Caddyshack. Batteries and bottled water weren't all they bought.
No one was buying wheat or rice, you know. It was all chips and dip and alcohol.
If you got stuck, unable to go to the liquor store, that would be terrible. So you would stock up on alcohol.
So as the storm approached the hotel on the Rolling Hills golf course where the cast and crew were staying, they were ready. In a state known for wild hurricane parties, the Caddyshack cast and crew hunkered down in the hotel, did their best to set a new standard.
Then we just had a big party that night. We all thought it was cool because anybody who's not from Florida thinks that a hurricane is cool, you know.
The hurricane itself was a bit of a letdown. But even though it wasn't as bad as predicted, for first-time director Harold Ramis, it was not a good start.
The first floor flooded, and the image that I always remember is that when the water receded, it left a carpet of earthworms. I mean, literally, just the floor was literally crawling.
Now, it didn't hit with full force, but it hit hard enough that it did destroy some of the sets.
Shooting was delayed while the sets were repaired, and the golf course was cleaned up. Harold's calm demeanor would serve him well throughout the shoot, as the chaos around him continued to build. His calm and friendly persona did not, however, make up for his lack of experience.
Very first shot, they said, where do you want to put the camera? And I look around, we're on a golf course, it's all trees and grass. I figure, well, one direction's as good as another. I said, well, let's look this way. And the first assistant director looked and said, so you want us to move the generator and all the trucks and the catering tent and the makeup trailers and all the star trailers? Was that what that stuff is? All right, no, let's not do that.
Harold may not have known where to put the camera, but experienced cinematographer Steve Larner, who'd recently finished shooting Badlands and the Buddy Holly story, did.
It was his special enjoyment to work with first-time directors. He was like a natural teacher.
There were a lot of firsts on the movie. It was Rodney Dangerfield's first big feature. So I had worked with him the night before on the upcoming scene, and we got everything set and had it all right.
So they rolled and, clapped it, and then Harold said, "Action."
Action, Rodney?
And Rodney goes, "Yeah. When I say action, you can come on out."
He goes, "Oh, you want me to do the bit?" And I said, "Yeah, do the bit."
If he didn't laugh at his shtick or whatever he's doing, he took it very personally.
Rodney, no, that's not the point. They can't laugh because if they laugh, they can't use it on the soundtrack.
I tell you, the day I was born, I got no respect. The doctor told my mother I did all I could, but he pulled through anyway.
The script was being all but abandoned as the actors improvised more and more of their scenes.
Hey, Mr. Webb, can I ask you something?
Sure thing. Shoot, Timmy.
Danny.
Danny. You take drugs, Danny?
Every day.
Good. So what's the problem?
He really never knew what he was going to say or what was going to happen. So you had to kind of be loose and open and aware.
Chevy and I had a good relationship, and I could just suggest stuff to him, and he would do it right away.
For Cindy Morgan, however, Chevy's improvisational style took some getting used to.
When Chevy spills that bottle of oil on my back, do you think I know that was coming?
Uh-oh, now I've done it. Get that away from you. Oh, I'm sorry. It's like reaching under the rug, isn't it? There we are.
Crazy.
Their scenes together were often tense. But while shooting the apartment scene, things blew up into an all-out war.
Chevy and I were doing the love scene. It was hot. We'd been working for 2 days. One of us had said something. The other one of us had said something. One of us walked. The other one wouldn't apologize.
Harold eventually convinced the two warring parties to finish the scene.
She went with everything. She was game, and that's what you look for, is someone who will roll with it.
Bill Murray was scheduled to be on set for only 6 days. But no one was entirely sure when he'd arrive, or what would happen when he did.
And suddenly we see this golf cart coming from the distance with a bunch of kids in it, and as it approaches, Bill Murray stands and goes, "Which way to the youth hostel?"
One of the first scenes Murray shot was the Dalai Lama scene.
Bill had the basis of a great speech from Brian, and then he started embellishing, and the embellishments were hysterical. I was out there throwing suggestions in, and I said, what if the Dalai Lama stiffs him, So he improvised the whole closing beat.
And I said, hey, Lama, how about a little something for the effort, you know?
I got that going for me, which is nice, is probably one of the most quoted lines.
It's really a tribute to Bill. Maybe one of the most famous comedy improvs ever is the Cinderella story.
I happened to be walking by when they were about to shoot that, and Harold said, come here, you're not going to believe this. And I was like, what? He said, just watch.
All the script said was that Carl was cutting off the tops of flowers with a grass whip.
I'd been jogging, and to keep my spirits up, I would be the announcer at the end of the marathon. Oh, this is, the runners are coming into the stadium. It's Ramis in the lead, and I would keep just, it seemed funny to me. So I said to Bill, I said, do you ever, when you're playing a sport, like pretend you're also the announcer? He goes, he said, say no more.
Young greenskeeper, Garth Speckler, U.S. Open. She's got about 320 yards. She's going to punch an 8-iron up there.
And he started doing this whole thing, and he had just written it right then and there.
Cinderella story. Out of nowhere, a former greenskeeper.
It just shifted the whole weight of the movie. It unbalanced it in terms of telling a coming-of-age story.
And as their roles got bigger, the roles of the caddies had to get smaller.
I think ended up making it more like a Marx Brothers movie. It had all the shape of an early Marx Brothers film. You had like a high society, snooty people played by Ted Knight and Lois Kibbe. In the Marx Brothers, it was always Sig Ruman and Margaret Dumont. And then I thought, all right, Rodney's like our Groucho, and Bill's like our Harpo, and Chevy's like Chico, and it had that shape.
And I said, wait, we have the two biggest comedy stars in the world, and they don't talk to each other.
So Doug and I and Brian sat down and created a moment, a climactic moment. I told the set decorators to create a little apartment for Bill in the back of a shed with a old car seat for a sofa and just throw a blanket over it, I said, and get a big wooden wire spool for a coffee table. While they were doing the set, we had lunch and we laid out the scene beat by beat. What happened, Chevy walks in and what they talk about, and that Bill is studying greenskeeping. He wants to move up in the world.
The plan was to shoot it that afternoon, but rumors swirled on the set that Chevy and Bill were feuding. Shooting this new scene meant they'd have to work together, something they hadn't signed up for.
There was a lot of tension because of the Chevy chase. Bill Murray reported history.
Billy Murray is a very provocative guy. I mean, he's streets of Chicago. These are tough kids. They can fight.
Chevy and Billy, they were at war.
When it came time to shoot the scene, no one knew what to expect. The showdown between Bill and Chevy, however, never materialized.
They were absolute professionals and never displayed any sign of prior problems.
The scene with Bill and Chevy was hysterical because you didn't know what was coming next, and neither did they.
And then they just improvised, and some of the stuff is so funny.
We have a pond in the back. We have a pool and a pond. A pond would be good for you.
Harold was brilliant at getting into Chevy's head and Bill's head and making it clear to them what was working, what wasn't working, and kind of culling the improvisatory stuff that they were bringing to the film and refining it.
We shot, I think, for a day, and we got the scene in the a little bit, in the shack, in the golf shack. Doug Kenney was a very nice, quiet man, but he could be very volatile.
On one particular visit to Florida, Peters railed against the loose atmosphere and unprofessional behavior on the set.
Doug just said, when you come back again, you better come back with a different attitude or just don't come back at all.
But the legendary producer's influence on the movie wasn't all so contentious.
John was a bear. He fought for us every step of the way. I'm not sure we could have done what we did without John defending us.
He stayed out of the picture for the most part, but when he inserted himself, he was very clear and very specific and usually right.
I pretty much could protect the boys, the artists, the creative guys, and make everything okay.
I remember a rap party that I got so intoxicated I had to be carried home, and early, too. So it's like, I missed the whole rap party. It was kind of strange.
It's a famous saying, you're never so happy as when you see your dailies. You're never so unhappy as you are when you see your first rough cut.
It was difficult because we had so much funny stuff coming in as we shot the movie.
There was quite a bit of footage on this film. My first cut was 4.5 hours.
We had so much material and so many jokes and so many funny things and a story to tell I think the film just turned into spaghetti.
It would be, well, let's try this. We'd take this out, put that back in.
John and Mark and I said, we've got to do something. We can't show this to Orion. We'll all be fired. We have to fix this film, and none of us have the skills to do it.
When the movie was cut together, it didn't cut together.
So they kept cutting scenes to get it down to a more manageable length. But as those scenes disappeared, much of the original plot disappeared along with them.
What basically remained was a series of wonderful vignettes, but it didn't have that through line.
Enter the gopher.
We didn't realize at the time that the gopher could be a central, pivotal thread that moved the comedy and the humor and the drama throughout the piece.
During the shooting of the film, principal photography, there was only one scene in which the gopher appeared.
The gopher was originally a hand puppet, and Trevor Albert, our assistant, he was the gopher.
They pointed to a hole in the ground behind a sand trap and said, all right, you got to get in there, and you take this puppet and put it on the end of your hand, and when Rodney yells, that gopher's, or what does he say?
That kangaroo stole my ball.
You know, you pull the puppet back down the hole, and so that was me. So I was a gopher, and I was a gopher.
But now they were talking about making the gopher a main character. A sock puppet wouldn't cut it.
I mean, it was just a puppet. Think about it.
John Peters said, I'll go dig up more money. We got to see the gopher underground.
Special effects whiz kid John Dykstra had recently won 2 Oscars for his work on Star Wars.
It had to have the ability to make anthropomorphic kinds of expressions, smiling, frowning, confusion, surprise.
He needed to be able to spit water, cough, smoke.
And he had to be physically adept, be able to dance and to move around.
I determined early that the ears gave the most expression, right? That you could, curiosity, anger, what's going on over here, there. And that by changing the profile of the head, I could get a lot of emotion. And then I also wired it so that he could snarl to the left or snarl to the right or, bare his teeth entirely.
It's a gopher world, and we're just living in it.
They created all this wonderful world of the gopher. And at first I thought, oh man, they're polluting my work of art here somehow with this animation. But it turned out to be funny.
Not everyone agreed, however.
Doug was outraged by the gopher and didn't want the gopher in the movie. And he was, he's furious that John Peters had suggested the gopher and they were spending all this money on the gopher.
In fact, by then, Doug Kenney was becoming disillusioned with the whole movie-making process.
During the editing process, the movie in some ways got taken away from him. They brought in a new editor. And I think Doug at this point was just like, no way.
He wanted a much more intellectual film. He wanted a much, more interpersonally sensitive film. I think Danny's tale was far more important to him.
We wanted to blow up the green, but of course the golf course didn't want us to blow up one of their greens.
Real golfers don't like their golf course blown up that much.
And we had to convince these people to blow up their course. They said no. We created a party, sent them to the party. They went to the party, and while they were there, they saw on the news that their golf course was being blown up.
So, but it's true. That's how John is. He came up with that idea. Well, let's buy him dinner, then they'll let us blow up their course.
I remember the day that I walked over and said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, we're building a fake golf mound." I still don't know anything about golf. What are they called? Golf hills?
So in the space between 2 fairways, they built an artificial green.
They came back. We left. They called the police. They made us file a report, but we gave them money, and it was good, and it went away. I may have made all this up. I don't remember.
There was a lot of extras around, and Harold got on the megaphone and said, "We can only do this once." So he said, "It's very important that you're focusing on the ball." And all of a sudden, this thing exploded with such incredible force.
The nearby Fort Lauderdale airport didn't think it was so cool. An incoming pilot allegedly reported the golf course explosion as a plane crash. As the producers and studio readied the film for release, the question was, would Caddyshack get the attention of the movie-going public? Caddyshack hit theaters on July 25th, 1980, almost 2 months later than the planned release date. By then, Doug Kenney had had enough of Hollywood.
He just had a hard time, I think, assimilating into the Hollywood thing.
Caddyshack wasn't under his control. It wasn't the film he wanted.
After the premiere, Critics were not kind.
Caddyshack is not about the Mikado's daughter-in-law elect. It's about as rotten a movie as has slopped the screen this summer.
It wasn't Animal House, and that's what people were hoping for or expecting from us.
The cast and crew of Caddyshack felt the sting of professional disappointment in the wake of the generally poor reviews the movie received. Just 2 months later, though, they were struck even harder by a personal tragedy. On August 27th, Doug Kenney's body was found at the bottom of a cliff in Hawaii.
Doug never got to see the film be a success. He got to see the premiere, he got to see the bad review in the LA Times, and a few days later, he was gone.
People say, that it was the failure of Caddyshack that pushed him over the edge, but that wasn't true. I mean, he was pretty depressed anyway.
I was in the office with John when we got the news. He said, he must have thought he could fly.
I loved him completely, and, it was, it sort of woke everybody up. And Doug was the first to go. The next year, John Belushi died. So it was like a wake-up call for all of us to start looking at our lifestyles and, figure out who we were and who we wanted to be. And, is this good? Is this, should anyone be living this way?
But the tapestry of that film includes many, many fibers created and woven by Doug Kenney and would be utterly different without Doug's contribution.